Those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeff Jackson, and I started breakdrink.com, but I also work as the Associate Director of Student Life at San Antonio College. That's the job that pays me. And also have my friend Heather Roundtree that we work together at University of Arizona, and she's now the Director of something at Loyola. What's your official title, Heather?
Director for Co-Curricular Programs.
Yes. We've been talking about presenting together for well over a year now on this topic, and so I'm excited that we finally get to do it. And Heather has been talking about these things, I think, before most people, as far as your online profile and presentation, or she will call it your webutation. And so there were some things last year that came up that kind of sparked me wanting to do more about this. So about teaching digital citizenship and about how I don't think we're doing it, but I want to start out with some statistics and charts, because people seem to like those because they're easy to follow. So this is from a study that's breaking down use of social networks by age. And if you look back into '06, the 18 to 19-year-old demographic has not changed much. Like they were kind of already there. So 93% to 3 years later or 4 years later to be at 95.9%. That's not much of a change, because if you're already that high, you can't grow. But even if you look at the smallest number, 40 years old and over, that's gone from 11% to 47.7%. So every age demographic is going up as far as people, and specifically students, that have used social networks or social networking websites. And so it is growing. It's becoming, or has become, a part of everyday life for students and also for staff. So this is talk about students are already there, and this is already a part of their culture. And in '04, when Facebook first came out, a lot of student affairs professionals and higher education professionals were very nervous because of the privacy issues with Facebook. And a lot of them just said, don't use it. And so I think the answer of don't use Facebook is not an answer we should be doing. It should be more of changing the culture of using these things rather than saying no. You don't want to be the parent that just says no all the time, and the students just want to rebel against you. So a few years ago, studies came out that by the end of 2008, social networking has become more popular than email. And you may have already found this out on your campus. Students may be more responsive to you communicating via Facebook groups or Facebook pages versus sending out emails. I don't even use listservs anymore. They're just not effective. Very few people read the messages that were there, and so you spend a lot of time writing these long messages that were there. So I would rather use social networks or Facebook than just trying to use listservs as an effective way of communication. So just the way social network and social media is fundamentally changing the way we're communicating. So ask the question, are we teaching digital citizenship? And then the little summary is we try to teach students everything, just from citizenship to how to write a resume effectively, what to wear in a job interview, effective language or inclusive language. But does it feed over? Is there elements of this that goes over to the digital world? So are we teaching them effectively? And a few things I want to point out at this point of the presentation is that we do a lot of things for students, especially in leadership seminars, leadership workshops, that we encourage students to find their voice. What are the issues that you're passionate about? What are things that you care about finding your voice? And I think with teaching social media effectively gives us an opportunity to talk about ways to use that voice. Whether it be podcasting or blogging or creating your own websites or whatever it is, for whatever social cause they want to be a part of. I know within the SA Chat community on Twitter, there are a lot of people that have gotten their undergraduates or graduate students involved in these conversations to interact with professionals before they're actually even in the profession. And I think that's a great use of using social media in a positive way. So again, changing the tone of the conversation to don't use it, to use it effectively, that's one way to do that. And I think also to have the conversation about representing yourself online as appropriate behavior. And I'm going to share a couple examples how one comment can leave a lifetime of consequences. The first one I want to talk about is in the back. Rachel there was a student at Truman State University, and she replied to her friend on Twitter saying, "We can go on a Jew killing spree, or can we go on a Jew killing spree soon? I need to release some angers, and Jews are always a worthy target." I don't think we really need to go into why this is inappropriate, but this was huge. And if you go and Google Rachel's name there, you're going to find a lot of comments about her. That's the front page of Google for her. So whenever she applies for a job, whenever someone goes to Google her, this comment is always going to be there. Twitter is very public. Facebook is a little more private, even though the default settings for Facebook tend to be public now. They are a little more private in the sense that you can kind of control your friends and your groups around you. But when Buck put something on his Facebook account that was a derogatory term to about recently elected Barack Obama, he was dismissed from the team. So this was last year. He was a football player for the University of Texas who went on to play for the national championship last year. So it's kind of a big deal. And he was dismissed from the team. He went back and apologized. But again, even though the comment is not made public, so it is a little bit different than Mitchell, than Buck. The comment was not made public. However, still, when employers or people go to Google his name to research him, this is going to show up. Once you put something on the internet, to get it off is very hard because you don't have control over other people's pages that are writing for you. A lot of people wrote articles about Rachel. She was contacted by outside organizations from the Jewish community. There's a Jewish Internet Defense League or defense website that was very kind of scared of the language she used on there. So one comment, even though it could be innocent, or even though you could think you're joking, is going to could have very long-lasting effects on there. And lastly, I'll say is with the way that phones are now, and application markets and everything, it's getting different. So it's no longer something Facebook is no longer something you do when you're at home behind your computer or at work behind your computer. Not that any of y'all would do that while you work, but it's not like something you do there. It's mobile. Everything is a mobile application now. And I'd say also to talk about students, not only about their behavior online, but also about how they're being their safety online. So, for example, if they use sites like Foursquare or GoWalla, where the check-in is very popular, I think that's something that students need to be very wary about. So when Facebook first came out, and people were really worried, because Facebook kind of created a dossier for stalkers because it was all open. The privacy settings weren't there like they are now. And they had a thing for class schedules. So people would go in and put their address there, their contact information, and they would put in their class schedule. And the hopes were that in your class schedule you can find people taking the same classes as you. But since it was so open, you basically had your entire contact list of where you were at all times. Well, they've changed that. Things like Foursquare and GoWalla, which I'm not against them, but they need to be used in a smart way, can also change that. So if you have a child going to school, you wouldn't want them to let everyone know where they are at all times. And so I think talking about those things and talking about the safety around that is something that's very important. And to answer Laura Pasquini's question is, yes, there is a crack on that iPhone, which is probably why, no, it's not why I don't use it anymore, but it did crack pretty easily, I would say. And so, as I said earlier, Heather Roundtree is someone who's been talking about this for a long time, and she actually has written curriculum about this. And I'm going to make her a presenter really fast and let her go over not her presentation, but how she presents it. We will have this information available to you afterwards. We'll upload it and have it on the website. But I'm going to let Heather kind of take it over and how she presents protecting your reputation.
Okay, hello everyone. Like Jeff said, he and I have been talking about webutation and digital citizenship for a long time now, and the presentation that I'm actually going to show you, and like Jeff said, I'm going to actually walk you through the presentation, but more as a facilitator of if you are meeting with groups of students, how would you present this information, and I'm more than happy to share both the presentation and the curriculum with you afterwards. But I actually started this presentation back in 2006, and it was from our fraternity and sorority community, and they did a new member symposium and thought that this was a topic that was of a lot of interest to their members, particularly the new members coming in and what they were posting on Facebook, and just a general concern about what was happening. And so back then, there was definitely some educational programming happening, but not a lot. And so this was one of the first times students were talking about Facebook or MySpace and what their brand was on those sites. But since then, we know that a lot of our students have heard this not only in high school, but also coming up in college and orientation programs. So there's a number of different ways that students have heard about this information, but what we find is that it's still continuing to be an issue. And that may be something that you're seeing on your campuses, that you have seen students posting information on Facebook that's either inappropriate or illegal or does not represent your organization the same way that you would want it. And so it's a conversation that still needs to happen. So what I wanted to start with, and this is of course the first slide that I always have as students are walking in the room, just some of the pictures that everyone gets a chuckle at, but when we talk about it is actually pictures that are pretty common that we see of each other or our friends, or of course the illustrious being tagged in a photo, which is fantastic. But that is something that's pretty common. And so as everyone's coming in, one of the things that I do before even starting the presentation is that I have a host of disclaimers. And one of the first disclaimers is that this presentation is not to be intended that Facebook is terrible, that social networking is not a great tool, because it is. It's a great way to share information with people and to stay connected with friends, share pictures, market your organization or events that are happening. So there's a lot of great things to be used with Facebook, but there are definitely pieces that we need to be aware of so that we use these sites smartly, and like Jeff said, even things like Foursquare and other social media tools that, yes, we can use them, but are we really being conscientious of how we're using them and how we're promoting ourselves on these sites?
Heather?
Yes?
People are having a hard time hearing you. Can you move closer to your microphone?
Yeah. I'll try to speak up as well. Is this better?
That is better, yes.
Okay, perfect. And definitely stop me if there's any other problems with the audio. But the first piece is just kind of an overview of what I talk about with the students when we meet. So first is just by the numbers, so going over some general history about Facebook and really where it is today. One of the things, of course, that has developed since I've done this presentation last is, of course, the social network movie. So people may be a little bit more informed on the history of Facebook, but definitely in the program share with them about how Facebook was developed, really from, of course, as we know, a Harvard dorm room, all the way now to where it's over 500 million active users, which I'll show you in just a moment. But one of the pieces that we talk about with the by the numbers and the history piece is also the fact of how the privacy of Facebook has developed over the last number of years, and how in 2006, that's when they really started to open it up to people who did not have a .edu address, that it was then spread to international universities, and eventually that anyone with a valid email address could use the site. So just giving students some background that it's not just something you log into, that it's a corporation, that their intent is to get information out to you, but it's also great marketing for Facebook and all the advertisers that are on there. The second piece that we'll talk about is creating your brand, and really coming at this subject with the fact that you are creating a personal identity on these sites. It's not just restricting what you post and what you don't post, but who do you want to be on Facebook, and how do we look at other corporations and the way they use marketing to advertise themselves are basically the same way that you're using Facebook to advertise yourself and to really tell people who you are and who you want them to, what you want them to think of you. The next piece is, of course, protecting your webutation, which there's a few pieces, and we talk about the use of your information, and Jeff mentioned it earlier about stalking and really people being able to use this information in a way that could hurt you if that was their intention. The next piece is candidacy, which is something that is typically a hot topic for our students who want to be in a leadership position and how this information could be used. We also talk about Facebook at work. So in terms of educating students for what an internship would be like or what the work role would be like, and we do want to talk about some of the expectations around using Facebook at work. I know that that's a topic with other people I've spoken with, even in career development, is that this topic is becoming more and more popular with those groups in terms of preparation for careers, preparation for interviews, is talking about Facebook. And then lastly is, so what now? One of the things that is my second disclaimer with students at this point is that, we're not going to pull up all of your Facebook profiles right now. Typically it's because of the size of the group that we're presenting to. So if you have the luxury to be able to do that, then that may be something that you want to think about. But in my experience, I've really challenged them to take the information that they hear in the presentation, and if some of it is appropriate to your profile and it makes you step back and think, oh, should I actually have that posted, then they need to go back and start to look at their page and make those changes. And so that's something I would typically consistently remind them throughout the presentation to make sure that they think about this and take it home with them. So let me show you the next. These are some of the numbers that I typically share with students about Facebook. And again, it's just general information at this point, but it's helpful just to get an idea of really the massive amount of people that are using this site, which I also stress to them is the massive amount of people that can have access to your information. And so that is another reason why you really want to be conscientious of what you're posting online. What I have down at the bottom is just the statistics page that I typically use every time I update this presentation. What's been really interesting, as you can imagine, from 2006 to now, these numbers are just staggering how they've grown. And so this is something that if you do decide to do this presentation, please just make sure that the information continues to be up to date, and that link will be listed in the curriculum. But there are definitely some big pieces of information in here, not just that there are 500 million active users, but even as our students, what I will do is ask them, how many of you have logged onto Facebook this week? And of course, you'll get some chuckles, like, how in the world do you think I've only logged on once this week? How many of them have logged on once a day? And then how many of them have logged on multiple times a day? And sometimes I'll even throw in how many of you wish you were logged on right now during the presentation. And they typically get a kick out of that, but one of the things is that really it just opens not only their eyes, but even some presenters or other faculty or staff who were in the room about how often our students are on Facebook. And Jeff mentioned earlier about how people have transitioned from email to Facebook, but really the amount of time that students are spending on Facebook, we're finding just more and more outweighs the amount of time they're spending on email. So it's always a good visual. And then lastly, to jump down, is that the 30 billion pieces of content. And so when we talk about news stories and blog posts, and particularly photo albums, which is where a lot of our students are challenged with what information I should post or shouldn't post, is there a lot of pieces of content that are going out there. So you need to be smart about what you're tagging of people and what you're posting, because that all weaves into the brand that you're creating, which is actually the next step. And so I'll be honest, this is a very basic slide, and I tell them this. It should be pretty easy, and I have them just look at the different logos and tell me what the company is. And so clearly we have Target, Nike, McDonald's, Apple, very obvious vendors or very obvious companies. And we talk about, well, why is that obvious to them? And so one of the pieces is that, of course it's obvious, we recognize them by the photos, we recognize them by commercials, we recognize them by statements that they use with their organizations. We also talk about Apple, so if you were to think about it, what does Apple signify for you? What is the feeling that you get? Do you feel like they're on the edge of technology? It's smooth, it's expensive. There's a lot of different things that come to mind. And so what we talk about for students, you're doing the same thing. So you're creating your brand when you post your pictures, when you post status updates, personal information that you have on your site, different Facebook pages or groups that you may be a part of, tagged photos, again, and we'll talk about that in one of the next slides, and then also just your friends' information. And so really trying to get students to understand that it's not only a profile that you log into and check other people's information, but you're creating a brand yourself. And one of the pieces that's important also to stress to students is that whenever you post information on Facebook, unfortunately, it's not a two-way communication. That when you post that out there, there's no explanation of, oh, that was a joke, or, well, that's just between my friends and I. It's going to be whatever the perception is on the other side. So if you think of a potential employer looking at a picture of you and your friends having a late night out and you're kicked back with a 40, well, they may not understand why that picture is there of you and what that is telling them about you. And so they don't know that it was a joke or that there wasn't anything in it. There's no explanation. And so that's something that when you are talking with your students about creating your brand is definitely stressing that it's not two-way communication and what you're posting is very important. So the next piece that we typically go into is the uses of your information. And I know that Jeff has already touched on some of the pieces here, but one of the things that we talk about is the idea of being tagged. And so students, and you may have heard this with the students that you're working with, is that there are a number of people who, of course, everybody's tagging photos. So I ask them, have you ever been tagged in a photo or have you tagged someone? And almost every hand will go up in the room. But we talk about what are you tagging? And so we say that we're Facebook friends with each other, but ultimately we're usually tagging photos that are embarrassing of each other, or the night that you went out on Friday and thankfully you didn't have a camera but someone else did, and now those pictures are here to live on forever. We talk about that and students will often, again, start laughing, and because they know that, maybe they've been tagged in a picture, they've done that to someone else. But what we also talk about is that you don't know what someone has going on in their life. So you just went out this past weekend, but someone is also applying to be a resident assistant on campus. And so you just tagged that photo, even though this student has been trying to be careful in not posting pictures that are inappropriate or content that's inappropriate, and you've just tagged that person, and now when their Facebook profile is reviewed for their resident assistant application, that's there for them. And so oftentimes thinking about whatever organization you're presenting this to is putting it into terms of how tagged photos could affect either their candidacy for a position or something that they would not want to be caught with this inappropriate photo. The other piece to tagging is that students will often have questions about, can I actually remove a photo? And so how do I get this off my page? I've just realized, oh, I shouldn't have that on here, but what do I do now? And the unfortunate thing is that, well, ultimately, it really doesn't go away. And I know that's something as administrators, I feel like that's something we know, and we've told that to students, that it continues to come up that there is this belief that, well, if I just delete it, it's gone. And we all know that that is not actually true. For students, the advice that we can give them is that you do need to contact the person who is the owner of that photo album, and then you can personally ask them to remove that picture. But ultimately, even if you untag yourself in that photo is still out for everyone who is tagged in that photo or who have access to those friends' albums. And so definitely really challenging students that if we say that we're friends with the people that we're on Facebook with, then we really should be respecting the people that we're posting pictures of, and to think about the pictures that they would want to have posted of themselves. The next piece is stalking, and so I know that Jeff had already mentioned this in terms of Foursquare and some of the other technology that allows students to now tag where they are or to check in at different places. And often students will have, again, that sense of invincibility that this will not happen to me. And so one thing that we often talk about is just if someone is looking for you and does want to harm you, are you giving them the information to do that? So hopefully this will not happen to anyone and will not happen to any of your students, but the reality is that it does. And so how are you providing information that could help someone either find your location or track your daily activities, which I know that Jeff had mentioned a while back they used to have class schedules, and while we don't see that anymore, what we do see are people's cell phone numbers, people saying where they're going for the night, people telling, you know, folks after the football game, we're going to meet at this restaurant at this time, and we're giving them information of where you could find us. And so ultimately, again, it's going back to being conscientious of the information that you're posting. One thing that I often find is funny, and this will be my disclaimer number 3 typically during the presentation, and one that I think is really helpful to talk with your students about, is you'll have students that will, at this point, completely piece out of the conversation because they have thought, well, I have my security settings set. I've heard this, 100 times before. My high school teachers told me about being careful on Facebook, so this doesn't really apply to me. And I tell them that this is my disclaimer. And then I ask them for a show of hands of how many friends do you have. So we'll start, typically with an easy number, 100 friends. Raise your hand. And of course, there'll be some giggling and they'll raise their hands because who doesn't have 100 friends on Facebook now? And then the next one is then I'll ask them to hold their hands up and we'll continue to go up incrementally. So we'll go up to 200, 250, 400, and keep going. And then students, of course, will drop their hands as they've reached their maximum number of friends. But guaranteed, we have a good portion of the room whose hands are still up at 700 and 800 friends. My record right now is just over 1,700 friends that one student had, which to me, of course, I'm like, I don't even know 1,700 people. But the piece is that students are creating this false sense of security and saying that, yes, I've set my security settings, but then I've opened myself up and invited in 700 people. And so this actually, when students have come back after our presentation, has said that that was one of the more eye-opening pieces, because what we talk about is, do you actually know your friends on Facebook, or is it your friend's cousin's brother who was in town that one weekend and y'all met and then you decided to become friends on Facebook? And that's how it happens. The person who sits behind you 3 rows in class, y'all become Facebook friends because they requested you, and you don't want to be mean and not accept their friend request. And so people have just developed this group of friends that they may not really know, or it's just casual acquaintance. But then the other piece is, do you know where those people are checking their pages? And so is it the student who goes into the library and checks it and is looking at your profile and doesn't log off? Or who can then have access into their profile and see their friends? I was at a conference at Arizona State University, and I was in their student union, and I went to go log on Facebook, and someone, of course, had not logged out of their Facebook. And their profile wall was still up there, and so I actually wrote on their profile, I said, maybe next time I should remember to log off of my Facebook when I'm at the union. And then, of course, I logged off for them. But just a reminder that we don't know who is opening our information and where it's being used. And so while we say yes, that we have created our security settings, which as a reminder, we always tell students to absolutely do that, is we have to be reminded that's not always the safest measure, because we've just still invited a whole circle of people into our information. So the next piece is, of course, candidacy, and this is something that can be very appropriate for your students and may even be helpful if you're going into a process like RA selection or orientation leader selection, to talk about your profile and how that can impact your selection for a job, a scholarship, different leadership positions, because we know that that's absolutely being used. And so how do students connect the fact that their profile is also a reflection of the information they may share in a resume? And we spend all this time creating a very professional appearance in our interview and our resume, but we sometimes forget about the impact of the Facebook profile. And then the last two, the code of conduct. And so one thing we do share is that universities will often use information from Facebook in disciplinary procedures. So one thing you have to do is honestly know your university policy, and if you don't, I would encourage you to find out. And so whether that's contacting your dean of students or judicial affairs, is what is the practice for information that is gathered on Facebook? Oftentimes I tell them, while we do care for you, we're not scanning your Facebook pages all the time, but information that we're given that has either something illegal that's happening or it's violating the code of conduct, is that if we're given that information, we have to act on that. And so students are sometimes challenged with that, but I think making that statement up front will be helpful so that students understand what they'll be held accountable for information that's on your Facebook. And typically, with that code of conduct piece, when I present that out, I will present the statement from our Dean of Students Office or Judicial Affairs so that it's very clear. And the next piece is law enforcement, and that is a general reminder to students that not only do universities have access to this information, but absolutely law enforcement has access to Facebook information for use in investigations. One group we had this past weekend, we're doing a mock trial on hazing, and we were talking about how there have been a number of cases that they've actually subpoenaed information that was posted on Facebook based on photos and comments and messages that were going back and forth about a hazing trial. And so know that this information is absolutely out there. One of the things, and maybe you've done a presentation like this before and had this same experience, but students can often get very frustrated. And they say, well, this was just supposed to be fun. This was just supposed to be a way for my friends and I to, talk to each other. And now they'll even say all of these old people are on here because they think it should just be college students, even though it was originally all these college students that are now out of college and considered to be old people. But one of the pieces is that sharing with them, while that is true, the reality is this is what it's being used for. And the reality is you have to be prepared if you're going to have a Facebook page. These are the responsibilities that come with it. So one of the last pieces before we go into what now is just a quick piece on, and I'm just going to pull all of these up, is about Facebook and work. And like I said before, one of the things that we see more and more is that presentations about Facebook and basically your webutation are becoming more and more standard for our career services or career development offices. But one of the quotes that we have up here, that as social media becomes the latest branding strategy, job-seeking tool, and recruitment vehicle, it's also becoming the latest way for people to get job offers rescinded, reprimanded at work, and even fired. And so this is something, especially as our students are starting to transition into applying for internships or applying for jobs, is that they need to be just as cognizant of their Facebook page as they are their resume, or as they are when they're going to a career fair on campus. So how are they using Facebook as another tool to prepare them for the work world? One of the last bullets that I have on here is just some quick tips that we often remind students of, and you'll see this even if you have student employees, maybe not just students who are going on a professional job search, but don't mention your job search if you're still employed and you have not notified your supervisor. Maybe some of you have actually even seen this with some of your own friends or people that you've worked with in the past. That is definitely not the place to start the advertisement. Don't badmouth your current or previous employer, and then of course not posting embarrassing or offensive information, which we see happen. And again, those are some of the pieces where students can be somewhat naive in thinking, well, so-and-so is not going to see this, or there's no way this is going to get back to my supervisor, and we know that that's not the reality. And so one of the things that I think is part of our responsibility as we say we're educating leaders for the future and we're helping prepare these students for their jobs or for their life after college, is this is something we should be preparing them for, is what are the expectations of using social networking when you leave campus, and what will be the expectations when you're actually at work. And there is a host of information that we could actually go into deeper about just different feedback from businesses about use of social networking, how businesses have actually started to ban Facebook, but they're negotiating that with the ability to use it as a marketing tool. So there's a lot of great information out there, and I encourage you, if you work with career services or work with career development, to make this part of your workshops or presentations for students, because it's absolutely applicable to them now. So then the last piece is just, so what now? And one of the things, like I said, we tell students, this is the disclaimer. Everything that we've said may or may not have applied to you. Some of it may have really made you stop and think. And so what we want you to do is now stop and check your page, which may be 2 minutes after this. As soon as they get out of your presentation, they may be logged on. They may be even logged on their phone during your presentation. So ultimately is that you want to make sure that they're taking action with their own page. The next is really encouraging them that you want to create the webutation that you want. This is your reputation just as much as you want others to know your values or what you're like or your personality, that this is a tangible way that you're showing that to other people. Ultimately, set your privacy settings if that hasn't happened already. The next one that I didn't get as much time to mention today as I do in some of the other presentations is just remember that it's not just you anymore. And I'll often focus on this if I'm presenting to fraternity and sorority organizations or student organizations or student government, just about the fact that when you do have a Facebook profile and either you list yourself as being a member of that group or you talk about being in such and such a chapter, is that now you are really recruiting for your organization 365 days a year. And that's so often when people go on to find information out about a group or they're thinking about going through recruitment, that they will go on and they'll see members of these organizations, they'll go onto your profile and they'll start checking everyone's profile, And the information that you have will not only be a reflection of you, but will now be a reflection of your organization. And so I encourage you, if you're going to take this back to your organizations, is to think about what are those values and what are those expectations that you're wanting to promote as an organization, and do your members actually reflect that? And that can be a good activity for students to actually sit back and brainstorm together as a group, and what are some community standards that they have as members of this organization. Then the last two, one, Jeff kind of already mentioned this, but about what's going to appear on Google once someone actually goes in and puts their name in. And so many students have actually not Googled themselves yet. So I always encourage students, get on there and see what information pops up about yourself, just so that when another employer or a person looking at you researches your name, what are they actually seeing, and be prepared for that. And then lastly is that this is an ongoing process. So this is not something that will just be a one-time shot and then you never have to edit your profile again, but that it's something that is living and breathing and that you need to edit and maintain as you post new pictures, as you post status updates, that it's an ongoing process. So one of the things, just I guess in closing, is that this presentation has been really helpful for a lot of our students, and just really helping them to stop and think about what is the information that they've been posting. But one of the suggestions that I can make to you is just to customize it for the group that you're working with. So like I said before, if you're working with fraternities and sororities, tie it to those values. If you're working with specific student organization, tie it to the recruitment that they're doing. Other ways that you can connect it to not only their profiles, but the impact that that has on campus as well. So that is all that I have. I know Jeff is going to be taking questions if anyone does have any questions. So.
Great. And we use it, Heather and I both worked for a leadership program. This is something that we always had as every person in the program saw this presentation at least once, if not more than once. And we did a special sessions for the leaders of the program, the group leaders also. So we did continuing education on this topic. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat box or put it on Twitter. If I want to read a few of the comments that are on Twitter also. And Scott posted, he said, Intel has a great social media policy that I use in conversations with both professionals and student employees. And he gave the link to their social media policy. Which reminds me, we had a podcast, our Campus Tech Connection podcast, probably about a month and a half ago. We talked about the need for social media policy, because Student Affairs doesn't really have one at this point. And we have a Google Doc going, and I'd like for people to add to that. So if there are things that you want to add to the Google Doc, if you want to share links, if you want to do something, I would love to be able to take this at one point and make a little white paper or something like that and distribute. So I'll put that on the link to this presentation, and I'll also put it on Twitter in just a second, as soon as I get a chance to do so. So Heather, going back, what was the record of friends that you found?
It was a little over 1,700.
Well, our own Becca has 1,728.
Wow. Okay, then she would be my record.
Yes. So congratulations, Becca.
Congratulations. You're very social.
But she says she knows these people, but maybe it's a good time to edit the list. So Becca and I, who are currently friends on Facebook, she may audit me out of her Facebook list. So.
No, but I think that's actually a good point, though. And sometimes, and what I always want to tell students is that, you know, being social on Facebook is absolutely fine. So having 1,700 friends is great, but you really have to stop and think about, okay, then what am I posting? And so don't just post things because you think, well, only my friends can see it, because your friends is actually a much larger circle, and do you actually know everyone that's on there? But then also, maybe it is a good time to go through your page and think about, do I actually need this person on my profile? And so I know some people who, once a year, they always go through and they edit their Facebook page and they edit who they're going to be friends with. And then, of course, you always feel like the champion if you make it one more year. But it's definitely a good thing to think about and encourage your students to do.
And I want to say, Laura Pasquini emailed the link out to the doc that we were talking about from the CTC podcast. So those of you who are listening to this, please go in and add your comments. I would love to hear you, because people have some really great comments. Jenna said she's considering going over her Facebook list now. Laura agreed that putting the list is good. Someone who wasn't even listening to this live saw the Twitter comments and says that she purges her Facebook list almost monthly, and I gotta say, kudos to you for doing that, because I don't, and I had to go back because I started on Facebook when it started in 2004, and like there may have been a student who came in my office and found out I was on Facebook and friended me, and honestly I don't really remember how I fully understand that relationship. So I had a rule, is that if I didn't remember how I knew this person within 3 seconds of seeing their name, I'm taking them out of Facebook. Which is harder for women who get married and no longer have their maiden names. But I just purged 70 people out of my Facebook list this last week.
Wow. Very nice list.
Yeah, so let me go. Oh, and thank you for Becca. Becca said I can make it through the, we can still be friends. So there are no questions in currently. A lot of comments that people were making on this. So if you have questions, put them in the box. We have kind of gone to our time. And I will say, Heather has also written a curriculum about this because it was taught in some of the classes. Before she left Arizona, she wrote a curriculum about this. And we will also share her PowerPoint presentation. So if you want to use that, you can. There is a question that says, has anyone terminated a student for social media issues? And you may want to clarify, do you mean like removed from campus or kick them out of campus, but are there any disciplinary issues for social media issues? And actually Heather has a great story about that.
Oh, do you mean my story from the...
Yes, and actually he meant work/fired, so if they work on your campus, which actually goes along with Heather's story.
Sure, it does go along with our story. So I was working at Tulane University prior to University of Arizona, and at the Campus Recreation Center. And so we had an outdoor pool, and we would have our maintenance happen overnight. And so they would come in and between 2 and 4 a.m. and do that so that it wouldn't disturb the rest of the general operations. And we had a group of students who were found by our pool technician in the middle of the night in the outdoor pool. And of course he told them they weren't supposed to be there and that they needed to wait, and he went in to get a paper and pen, and of course they came out. You can imagine they were not there anymore. However, one woman had left her credit card on the pool deck. So probably not the wisest decision that she had ever made, but her credit card had been picked up and then given to our front desk for the next morning. And so our intern had actually gotten her credit card and then looked her up on Facebook actually to see if she was a current student, and she was. And of course information was in her profile about more late night pool parties at the Riley Center, and so she gave me that information. And so then she also found that there were other people making comments about the late night pool parties, and they all had mutual friends, because that's one of the great pieces, is that you can see who's mutual friends with who, and it ended up being a mutual friend of a current employee. And so we brought in each of the students and talked with them about what had happened, and there ended up that there had been alcohol involved, and they had basically climbed the fence to get into the swimming pool. And so the students were, of course, referred to Digital Affairs, and that student was fired from their position. So yes, we have, in my personal experience, that's the only time that I've ever had to terminate someone based on that information, but we did have to do that because that was the person that admitted having granted access to them. So I would say it wasn't so much that they posted something inappropriate, but we learned of a behavior that was necessary to terminate that employee based on information from Facebook.
The webinar may cut off. Hopefully it doesn't, because I only originally had it scheduled for 15 minutes, and we're going beyond that. But I believe it's still going. I would say also I believe we have removed, Heather and I, people from our leadership program and leadership positions, not the program but leadership positions, because of things they put on Facebook And also because they didn't seem to grasp why it was wrong to post pictures of them in underage drinking situations and why that wasn't okay. So sometimes it's hard to get that through to people. And I would say also, we never looked for this. Like we never like patrolled um, people's Facebook pages. It's just, you know, when they friend you and it comes up, it comes up. So. All right, I think we're going to end it there because we are a few minutes over. But Heather, thank you so much for presenting.
Of course, thank you.
And everyone, thank you for your comments, and happy Facebook purging, because I'm pretty sure that's what people are doing right now as we speak. And once this is made available online with all the other documents, I will contact people to let them know it's there. All right.